The blizzard's grip. The wind howled, a banshee scratching at the canvas of the wagon. Snow, thick as wool, plastered the windows, blurring the already bleak landscape into a swirling white nothing. Sarah May Harding gripped the reins until her knuckles shone white. Thomas was gone, buried somewhere back in that frozen hellscape they called a pass. Now just her and the babies. Plural. Dr. Albright had been clear on that before they left St. Louis. Twins. The wagon lurched violently, throwing her against the hard wooden seat. "Easy, girl," she murmured to the mare, patting her snow-caked neck. They were miles from anywhere, she was sure of it. The map had become useless hours ago, swallowed by the whiteout. A sharp pain ripped through her lower back, stealing her breath. She gasped, bracing herself against the side of the wagon. It was time. Hours blurred into a symphony of pain, punctuated by the thin, reedy cries of her daughters. Two of them. Tiny, fragile things, their faces scrunched and red. She wrapped them tightly in the only blankets she had left, her heart aching with a fierce, desperate love. As dawn painted the snow a bruised purple, Sarah crawled to the wagon door. The sight that greeted her stole the remaining warmth from her body. The snow had drifted high, burying the wheels of the wagon to their hubs. They were trapped. The wind still screamed, a constant, mocking reminder of her isolation. She was alone, with two newborns in the grip of a blizzard. The baby started to cry, a sound like tiny bells lost in the storm. Sarah held them closer, whispering, "We'll be all right. We have to be." But the words felt hollow, swallowed by the wind. Fading hope. The last of the dried apples tasted like sawdust and regret. Sarah chewed slowly, dividing each bite into three, one for her, one for each of the twins. Their tiny mouths latched on eagerly when she dribbled the reconstituted pulp onto their tongues. But even with the meager offering, their cries persisted, a constant, gnawing reminder of her failure. Days bled into each other, marked only by the dwindling supplies and the unyielding fury of the storm. Snow plastered the wagon's canvas, muffling the outside world in a suffocating white silence. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the wagon and threatening to tear it apart. Each breath was a visible cloud in the frigid air. She huddled closer to the babies, wrapping them tighter in the threadbare quilt that had been her grandmother's. Thomas had promised her a new one, a thick, warm woolen quilt once they'd settled. The memory was a fresh wound. Water was the biggest worry. The melted snow was gritty and left a foul taste in her mouth, but she had no choice. She dipped a rag into the small pot and squeezed droplets into the twins' mouths, praying it was enough. Their skin felt papery, their cries weaker. Hope, once a bright flame, flickered like a dying candle. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing Thomas's strong hands, his easy smile. Where was he now? Was he watching, helpless? A sob escaped her lips, a silent scream lost in the storm's relentless roar. She had to fight. For them. But the fight felt like a losing one. A cowboy's search. The wind clawed at Jedediah's face, each gust a frigid reminder of his own mortality. Snow, thick as cotton batting, plastered his beard and stung his eyes. He squinted, urging his horse, Betsy, forward. "Come on, girl," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the howling blizzard. "Gotta find those strays before they freeze solid." He gripped the reins tighter, his gloved hands numb. The cattle were Calhoun property, and their survival was his responsibility. He pictured them huddled together, their warm breath misting in the air, and pushed on. A sudden gust ripped through him, and for a moment he saw Mary, her auburn hair flying in the wind just like the storm. She was laughing, her eyes sparkling with a joy that had been stolen from him too soon. The memory, sharp and painful, almost knocked him from Betsy's back. He blinked, and the vision vanished, leaving only the white fury of the storm. "Damn it, Mary," he whispered, more to himself than her ghost. Why now? He knew why. The starkness of the land, the relentless cold, it all echoed the emptiness inside him. He shook his head, forcing the grief down. He had a job to do. He nudged Betsy forward. The cattle were out there, and he wouldn't let them down. Not like he let Mary down. He'd find them, even if it was the last thing he did. Wagon in the snow. The wind howled a mournful dirge, biting at Jedediah's exposed cheeks. Even Samson, usually unflappable, shifted nervously beneath him, his breath puffing out in white clouds. Jedediah tightened his grip on the reins, urging the horse forward. They'd been tracking what he hoped was a stray calf for hours, but the blizzard was erasing any sign. Then Samson stopped dead, his ears twitching, a low whinny rumbling in his chest. He pawed at the snow, a frantic energy coursing through him. "What is it, boy?" Jedediah muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Not a calf. Something else." He followed Samson's gaze, squinting against the swirling white. At first, he saw nothing but the endless, unforgiving landscape. Then a dark shape emerged from the snow-laden gloom, the vague outline of a wagon, half buried and almost invisible against the white expanse. Jedediah kicked Samson into a slow walk, his heart hammering against his ribs. Abandoned? Broken down? Or something worse? He kept his rifle ready, his eyes scanning the surroundings. No tracks other than the wagons, now nearly filled with snow. He approached with cautious steps, the only sound the mournful cry of the wind and the crunch of Samson's hooves in the deepening snow. Discovery. Jedediah wrestled the wagon door open against the wind's fierce resistance. Snow swirled inside, a miniature blizzard within the already blinding storm. The air hung thick with a stale, sour smell that pricked his nostrils. He fumbled for his lantern, the flickering light revealing a scene that made his gut clench. A woman lay slumped against the far wall, her face pale and gaunt. 2 small bundles were nestled beside her, wrapped in what looked like threadbare blankets. Jedediah knelt, his joints protesting with a familiar ache. He reached out a gloved hand, touching the woman's cheek. "Cold. Too cold. Ma'am," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse and the biting air. No response. He pressed his fingers to her wrist, searching for a pulse, a faint thrum against his skin. There. Weak, but there. He turned to the bundles. Twins, he realized, their tiny faces red and wrinkled. He reached into one of the blankets, feeling a soaked cloth diaper. The other felt dry, but frigid. Their breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Jedediah swore under his breath, the sound swallowed by the wind. This wasn't just bad. This was a goddamn disaster. A promise of help. The howl of the wind clawed at Jedediah, a mournful sound that mirrored the ache in his own chest. He hadn't heard a baby cry in. God, it had been 7 years since Mary's soft whimpers faded into silence. He remembered the crushing weight of her small coffin, the frozen earth resisting the grave digger's shovels. A new wave of grief washed over him, sharp and unexpected. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting it back. He couldn't afford to drown now. He looked at Sarah, her face pale and etched with exhaustion, the twins bundled against her. Helplessness clung to her like the snow. "I lost my wife some years back," he said, the words raspy. "I know a little something about being alone." He knelt, the icy ground numbing his knees. "I can't bring back your Thomas, ma'am, but I can promise you this. You ain't alone now. Not you and not these little ones." Carefully, as if handling precious glass, he scooped up one of the twins, then the other, tucking them close to his chest, inside his thick coat. Their tiny bodies were surprisingly warm. He glanced at Sarah, offering a small, reassuring nod. "Come on now. Let's get you inside where it's warm." He extended a hand, his weathered palm a stark contrast to her delicate fingers. "Easy does it. We'll take it slow." The storm still raged, but with each step toward the cabin, a fragile warmth bloomed in Jedediah's chest, pushing back against the biting cold. The ranch. The wind howled a mournful song as Jed urged the horses onward, the wagon wheels sinking deep into the snow-covered track. Sarah huddled in the back, clutching the twins close. Each jolt sent a fresh wave of pain through her weary body, but the tiny whimpers of her children spurred her on. Finally, a cluster of buildings emerged from the swirling white, the ranch. A plume of smoke curled invitingly from the chimney of the main house. As Jed pulled the wagon to a stop, a woman emerged, her face etched with concern. "Jedediah, what have you got there?" she called, her voice warm despite the biting wind. "Martha, this is Sarah and her twins. Blizzard caught them on the trail. They need help." Martha's eyes softened as she took in Sarah's pale face and the 2 bundles in her arms. "Come inside, child. Let's get you warmed up." The interior of the ranch house was a haven of warmth and light. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Martha bustled about, settling Sarah in a comfortable chair near the fire and gently taking the babies. "They're chilled to the bone," she murmured, unwrapping the infants with practiced hands. "We'll get some warm milk into them and have them right as rain." As Martha tended to the twins, Sarah watched, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. She was safe, at least for now. But the fear that had been her constant companion for days refused to be silenced. What would become of them? Accusations. Sarah May's color returned slowly, like dawn creeping across the plains. Jed watched her carefully, noticing the way she'd reach for one of the twins in her sleep, a silent promise of protection. He felt a tightening in his chest, a familiar ache of loss mixed with something new. He busied himself with mending a tear in the tent canvas, the rhythmic stitching a small comfort. "They're beautiful, Jedediah," Sarah May murmured, her voice still raspy. She was watching him now, her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude that made him want to bolt. He grunted, his gaze fixed on the canvas. "They got your eyes?" A shadow fell across the tent opening. Silas Blackwood, his face weathered and hard as granite, stood there, hands on his hips. "Calhoun," he spat, the name sounding like a curse. "Words gettin' around your playin' nursemaid instead of tendin' to your herd. Seen a couple of your beeves lookin' mighty thin yesterday. Neglectin' your own to coddle a stranger." Jed's jaw tightened. He stood, towering over Blackwood. The scent of wood smoke and damp wool clung to the air, thick with unspoken animosity. "My cattle are fine." "Fine? Or just alive? You always were soft, Calhoun. But this is a new low. You think you're a saint now. Talking in strays." Blackwood's voice dripped with scorn. "While your own suffer. Shame on you." He spat on the ground and turned, his parting words hanging in the frigid air. "Don't expect any help from me when winter truly bites, Calhoun. You'll be too busy changing diapers to save your hide. New beginnings. They're under my protection now, Barlow," Jedediah stated, his voice a low rumble that echoed in the sudden hush. Barlow, a man built like a bull and twice as mean, scoffed. "Your protection? You can barely protect your own spread, Calhoun." Jedediah simply stared, a cold fire in his eyes that spoke of a resolve Barlow clearly hadn't expected. "Get off my land, Barlow, and leave them be." Barlow, muttering about land rights and wasted resources, eventually retreated, his bluster failing against Jedediah's quiet determination. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of shared labor and quiet companionship. The townsfolk, hearing of Sarah's plight and Jedediah's unexpected act of gallantry, rallied. Wagons arrived laden with supplies, flour, salt pork, blankets knitted with clumsy but heartfelt care. A carpenter, his face etched with concern, offered to reinforce the cabin walls. Jedediah accepted their help with a gruff nod, his heart swelling with a gratitude he couldn't voice. As winter loosened its grip and the first hesitant green shoots pushed through the thawing earth, Sarah stood beside Jedediah, watching the twins gurgle and kick in a patch of sunlight. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of damp earth and the promise of wildflowers. "Thank you, Jedediah," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "For everything." He looked at her, at the tiny lives nestled in her arms, and a flicker of something long dormant sparked within him. "We'll make a life here, Sarah," he vowed, his voice rough with emotion. "A good one." The future stretched before them, uncertain, yes, but filled with a fragile hope nurtured by kindness and forged in the crucible of shared hardship.